Audrey Munson, America's first supermodel, lived for 104 years, but spent 65 years of her life locked away in a lunatic asylum. And when she died, she was buried in an unmarked grave. This is the story of the beautiful life that went from being in the Palace of Kings to an institution for mentally deranged people for the rest of her life in under just 2 years. Born on June 8, 1891 in Rochester, New York, Audrey Munson was the only child shared by Edgar Munson and Catherine Mahaney. Her parents separated when she was 8, and Audrey had to move with her mum to Providence, Rhode Island. Audrey's career as an actress started when she was 17. She moved to Washington and made her first Broadway appearance in The Boy and Girl at the Aerial Gardens of the New Amsterdam Theatre. And after this, she went ahead to make a few other appearances in Broadway plays. Audrey grew up to be a tall, elegant young lady. Her mother, Catherine, recognizing her potential for greatness, encouraged her to feature in Broadway plays, and this would continue until a casual window shopping trip changed her life. While staring at those windows, Audrey caught the attention of famed photographer Felix Benedict Herzog. Felix was enchanted by Audrey's beauty and was willing to give anything to get her to pose for him at his studio. Audrey accepted, and this was the beginning of great things for her. Felix would introduce Munson to his friends in the art industry, and like Felix, they all wanted to have Audrey featured in their works. She would post for muralist William D. Leftwich Dodge, who linked her with Isidore Conti, a sculptor and architectural modeler. But Isidore wanted something different. He wanted her to pose naked for him. Munson and her mother were not comfortable with Conti's request, but somehow he managed to convince them. "To us it makes no difference if our model is draped or clothed in furs," Conti explained. "We only see the work we are doing." Audrey made the nude pose for the sculptor, and as Isidore anticipated, the art was a huge success. It even inspired the statuary of the Three Graces. Now Audrey was attracting a lot of public attention. Photographers wanted her to pose for them, painters were dying to have her featured in their works, and illustrators just couldn't get enough of her. But none of this pleased her like sculpture modelling. After the unveiling of Conti's marble statuary of the Three Graces at the Hotel Astor in Times Square, Munson established herself fully as a sculptor's model. After a decade, she became the model of choice for the first tier of America's sculptors. And by 1913, according to The Sun, over 100 artists agreed that if the name of Miss Manhattan belonged to anyone in particular, it was to Audrey Munson. 2 years later, she became Alexander Sterling Calder's model of choice when he was the director of sculpture for the Panama Pacific International Exposition, which earned her the Panama Pacific Girl title. With great fame and recognition such as this, Audrey made a smooth transition into the film industry, making appearances in 4 silent films. However, she caught the headlines again when she appeared fully nude in a movie about a sculptor's model. Why wasn't the movie banned? Well, banning the movie would mean that they would have to stop all forms of nude Renaissance art, and the censors were too scared to make that move. As expected, Munson's films were bringing in big numbers at the box office, and it was every director's dream to have Audrey Munson in one of their films. She continued to make appearances in a few controversial movies before she transitioned back to modelling. Audrey became an advocate for women artists, protesting for equal rights and judgments, refusing to live in the shadows of men as it was in those times. She published a series of articles in 1921 about the role of a model in the artistic process. Audrey Munson grew to become a very beautiful and elegant young lady, desired by a lot of prominent men, and she attracted a lot of them as suitors. The most popular was railway executive Paul Hardaway, whom she was engaged to for a few weeks. Munson realised that she didn't love Paul enough to spend the rest of her life with him. She called it quits, and as some form of compensation, hooked him up with her friend, who was also a model. Deciding to avoid all forms of distraction to focus on her career, Munson would continue to star in other films until ill fate struck. And it struck really hard. Audrey was reported to have bad spending habits and hung out with the richest men in New York. As one of the most desirable women of her time, a lot of men wanted her. The most popular was Herman Ulrichs Jr., who was rumoured to be the richest man in America. But Munson was not impressed. She even wrote a letter to the state claiming that Herman was a member of a pro-German cabal that wanted her out of the film industry. And this was the beginning of the end for her. Due to her busy schedule, Audrey was barely home, but for the times when she was around, she stayed in a boarding house in New York with her mother. This house was owned by Walter Wilkins, an aged physician. Like most men, Walter was attracted to Munson, but he was so madly obsessed with her that it made him do the most bizarre thing to get her attention. Walter Wilkins beat his wife Julia dead with a hammer and a lead pipe. He was arrested immediately by the police, and when he was questioned, he said that he killed his wife so he could marry Audrey. At that time, Audrey and her mother were out of town, but the police tracked them down to Canada. She refused to return to New York for reasons best known to her, and so was detained in Ontario for questioning. She denied any romantic affiliation with Wilkins. To her, he was just the man that owned their house. Walter Wilkins was sentenced to death by the electric chair, but before his execution date, he hanged himself in his cell. News of this unfortunate incident spread across Europe, and it kick-started the end of Audrey Munson's glorious career. From turning down several job offers and selecting the ones that paid the highest to struggling to get jobs, Munson's career was heading downhill, and there was nothing she could do about it. By the end of the following year, Audrey Munson was completely bankrupt. She relied on her mother's trade of kitchen utensils to survive. Due to her lavish spending and glamorous lifestyle, Audrey didn't have any investments that would have assisted her when her modelling career ended. In November 1920, she settled for a job as a ticket taker in a dime museum. At this time, newspapers and magazines in every part of the country were covering Munson's tragic career downfall. She got into trouble with the producers of the film Innocence, in which she was a leading character, and she was arrested. Frustrated by the struggle to get jobs, the numerous police cases, and the constant media trolls, Audrey decided to take her life by ingesting a solution of bichloride of mercury. Luckily, she was rushed to the hospital just in the nick of time. After she was revived, her mother, in fear that she would make another attempt on her life, sent out petitions to the court to assign her to a mental asylum. The court granted her request, and this was how the once supermodel spent her 40th birthday at the psychiatric faculty of the St. Lawrence State Hospital in Ogdensburg. At the institution, Audrey would often escape to the nearest bar and would remain there until she was found by the nurses. She was transferred to another mental institution because of this. For the next 65 years, Audrey Munro received constant treatment for depression and schizophrenia. She died on February the 20th, 1996, aged 104. She was buried at a nameless grave in the New Haven Cemetery. Her grave only got a headstone on June the 8th, 2016, 20 years after her death. Munson's mother was her only visitor, and after her death, Audrey didn't have any visitors for the next 25 years until her half-niece, after a long search, rediscovered her. And this is the tragic story of how the famous Audrey Munson was almost wiped out of history despite her great impact on the modelling industry. What do you remember about America's first supermodel? Do you recognise any statue of her in New York? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and hit subscribe for more videos like this. As always, thanks for watching.